Underuse and overuse of antibiotics continues to contribute to antimicrobial resistance not only in Kenya but across the globe. This week on Health Watch, we take a look at the use of bacteriophages, which could be a likely solution to end this problem. My name is Saada Hassan. It is estimated that the cost of developing an antibiotic is about $1.5 billion, while the average revenue generated from the sale of the antibiotic is roughly $46 million every year. As a result, many pharmaceuticals have stopped manufacturing newer antibiotics despite a rising problem of antimicrobial resistance. The World Health Organization is warning that antibiotics are becoming increasingly ineffective as drug resistance continues to spread. Dr. Lilian Musila, the principal research scientist at the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, has been focusing on antimicrobial resistance surveillance and research.
Antimicrobial resistance is the ability for organisms like bacteria to resist being killed by antibiotics. So when we say that there's antimicrobial resistance, we mean that the bacteria or the different organisms we're trying to kill using antibiotics are not being killed anymore.
The cost of treating and managing antimicrobial resistance is enormous. It not only affects national economies and their systems, but also the productivity of patients through their prolonged hospital stay.
A study reported that in 2019, antimicrobial resistance caused more deaths in sub-Saharan Africa than HIV and malaria. And we usually think about those two things as some of the biggest problems that we have. So you can see that in sub-Sahara, this is going to become one of the big problems here as well. It's estimated that by 2050, there'll be about 50 million deaths that are caused by antimicrobial resistant infections. So clearly you can see that this is a very big problem. And the World Health Organization has identified some of the organisms that are increasing most rapidly in resistance, and they've put them on their to-watch list. So the WHO has defined several priority pathogens that are increasing in resistance much further. And they say that these bacteria are the ones that we should prioritize, one for surveillance, which is to monitor their resistance, but also for the development of new antibiotics.
Dr. Atunga Nyachieyo, a senior researcher at the Institute of Primary Research, says that habitual behavior by people is what contributes to antimicrobial resistance.
If somebody has like headache, when they go to the chemist, the first thing they ask for is antibiotic. And because of misuse of antibiotic, then we are experiencing very high rates of resistance. In fact, it has been predicted that by the year 2050, 90% of the deaths due to antimicrobial resistance will actually occur in low or developing countries.
Dr. Musila says that the problem is beyond an individual, even if institutions are at fault.
In a study by Mine et al., they found that less than 1% of antibiotics that are dispensed in a hospital are accompanied by lab data, which means nobody has actually tested to see if this antibiotic will kill that bacteria. So what it means then is that about 46% of our patients are being treated with antibiotics unnecessarily, either because they don't have a bacterial infection or because they didn't need that particular antibiotic, or things like that. So we're actually using our antibiotics quite carelessly. So the first thing that in an ideal world you should do is you should find out, do I actually have a bacterial infection? One of the most common areas of misuse is sore throat. So not all sore throats are caused by bacterial infections, but many people think if I have a sore throat, I should get an antibiotic. So we're misusing antibiotics. The other thing is because antibiotics can be quite expensive, sometimes we take not the complete dose, we underdose, and underdosing makes the bacteria more able to adjust and become resistant to it.
Scientists are now exploring the possible use of bacteriophages or phages as a way of curbing antimicrobial resistance in both humans and animals.
Bacteriophages are viruses that kill bacteria and they exist in the environment, and they are very abundant everywhere. Actually, they are the most numerous life forms on Earth, to the power of 10 raised to power 31. That means there are so many in this world. And these bacteriophages normally survive where there are bacteria, because they kill bacteria but also survive on that. They infect the bacteria and kill them.
From this point, we enrich it.
Dr. Nyachie explains that one of the advantages of using bacteriophages is that, unlike pharmaceuticals where one has to mix up compounds, the phages are naturally found in the environment where the bacteria are found, and therefore they can easily be picked to kill the multi-drug resistance bacteria. Dr. Musila explains that this is not a new method.
Bacteriophages have a beautiful history. They were actually discovered in 1917 by a French scientist called Felix Durel, and he was growing stool from a patient who was sick, and he noticed that when he grew them, there were these patches on the plate where the bacteria didn't grow. So they investigated what these patches were, because they were like, this thing is preventing these bacteria from growing, and they discovered that there were actually viruses that were there, and there were viruses that kill bacteria. That's where the name came from, bacteriophages, which literally means the eaters of bacteria.
When penicillin was discovered and the era of antibiotics began, many people forgot about the phages.
The former Soviet Union, the phage research had continued happening, and they continued to find and discover phages and treat their patients. So it didn't die altogether. And in 2008, when this era of superbugs began to emerge, other European countries like Belgium and France also began to use bacteriophages for therapy. So these bacteriophages, how they work is that each bacteriophage recognizes a specific bacteria. And it recognizes because they have what we call receptors, or ways to recognize a particular bacteria. And once this phage recognizes a bacteria, it injects its DNA into the bacteria. Then it takes over the bacteria and makes the bacteria make many phages. And once they make many phages, then these phages then burst out of the bacterial cell, killing it. So it lyses the bacteria, it kills them. And then all these new phages that the bacteria made go on and attack other bacteria and kill them. And they go on and attack other bacteria and kill them. So from a very small dose of bacteriophages, you can actually kill very, very many bacteria because they amplify themselves.
At the Center for Microbiology Research at KEMRI, we see a lab process of identifying bacteriophages and how it works using sample water taken from the Nairobi Dam.
Once you have the sample from the water runoffs, we enrich and isolate phages from it.
54% of these pathogens are multi-drug resistant. So multi-drug resistant means that they're resistant to 3 or more classes of antibiotics. And just to go back, many different antibiotics have been found, and they all have different ways of killing bacteria. And so they're classified into different classes based on how they kill. So we found that 54% of them are multi-drug resistant, which means they're resistant to 3 or more of these classes, which means already we're running out of options. Now, one of the most prescribed classes of drugs in Kenya, according to a study by Mumanyi et al., are the cephalosporins, and they're prescribed most often in our big hospitals. And among our isolates, we find that about 48 to 56% of the isolates that we study are already resistant to this class, obviously because they are used often. Now, if you find that they're resistant to this commonly prescribed drug, then you would use a higher level class of drugs, for example, carbapenem drugs. But we're seeing also in our study that we have about 15% of our organisms are resistant to carbapenems. So you see already some are resistant to another class of drugs.
Some of these pathogens cause common infections like pneumonia, skin infections, boils, surgical site infections, sore throats, or diarrheal diseases like E. coli. Kenya is now taking steps to ensure that we catch up with this bacteriophage therapy and solve the antimicrobial crisis.
We're focused especially on looking at bacteriophages for these top 6 WHO priority pathogens. And we have already a library of about 200 phages. that are specific towards some of these bacteria. So what we're trying to do is, one, to begin to create awareness on the use of bacteriophages for therapy, so that the barriers, the mental barriers, can be brought down. Just demonstrate to people that these phages have been being used and they've been used safely, and there's more research that's being done to even improve the data on the safety of their use. And our next step is to begin to develop these libraries in Kenya, where we can put all of our phages together, so that we can begin to develop either personalized use or cocktails, where we can put together like phages against common bacteria that cause something like diarrhea, and package them as a cocktail that can be taken if somebody has a diarrheal infection. So we're still a little bit far, but we've started, and we've started strong. What many of these groups need, because some of them are quite small, is we need additional funding to be able to do very extensive screens for bacteriophages from our environment. But we also need banks to bank them, like really well-run phage banks to run them. And then we also need to do additional research on whether they're safe to be used. So for instance, we need to do whole genome sequencing to make sure that these phages are not carrying things that are not helpful. For instance, antimicrobial resistance genes. We don't want to give bacteria an advantage over us, and other like toxin genes or things that might not be beneficial. So whole genome sequencing structures to understand the phages better. And then also we need to work with the regulators to understand how will they regulate bacteriophage as a therapy. Will they regulate it as a drug? Will they regulate it as like a probiotic, which we use to introduce good bacteria into our guts. So we need to work with the regulators to understand what's the regulatory framework. We don't want it to be too long, but we also don't want to be unsafe.
Purchasing antibiotics is costly. Will phages be a cheaper option?
I look at it and see that it's going to be cheaper, given that bacteriophages are available within us, are available. You can isolate them easily from the environment, and therefore the cost is going to go down. Because if you look at the cost of producing antibiotics, like the chemical molecules, is so expensive and it takes time. But here are living organisms that exist within the environment that we just be able to isolate and test that they can kill the targeted bacteria.
Phages are very specific to bacteria. They are safe for humans to use because they will not infect a human cell. So sometimes people are scared. Are you going to put viruses inside me? And I say, yeah, but they're not interested in you. They're only interested in the bacteria, and only that specific one that is causing you to be sick. So the other side of this advantage is that you have to have the specific bacteria that will kill your specific phage that will kill your specific bacteria. And this is a problem that has made it difficult to use bacteriophages widely. Because if I have patients in a hospital, am I going to go and hunt for a bacteriophage for each of my patients, depending on what is infecting them? So countries that have chosen to adopt this approach, whole meal, are also investing in phage libraries. So this means that they have teams of people who keep checking the environment for bacteriophages, because they're found naturally in the environment, screening against very many of these bacteria, and in particular these 6 that the WHO has prioritized. And then they keep banking them, so that if I have a patient in the hospital, then I just go to that phage library and screen a few of them and see which ones will kill my patient's infection, and then use it to treat them.
Unlike how antibiotics work by killing all bacteria, good and bad, bacteriophages are specific and leave the good bacteria. Although still at an early stage, bacteriophages have worked in other settings.
At a national level, we need to have guidelines for how antibiotics are prescribed, how they're used, how they're regulated, both in the human and in the animal industry, so that we can preserve what antibiotics we do have.
The last decade has seen a dramatic increase of antimicrobial resistance here in Kenya. It is now a ticking time bomb that needs to be addressed before the matter gets worse. Saad Hassan, KTN News at Kemri, Nairobi.